In 73 BC, a young slave girl named Olivia screams as red-hot iron burns through her cheek, seeing her master's initials into her flesh forever. But that's not even the worst part, because what happened next in Rome's underground chambers, modern torture, look like child's play. I'm about to reveal 3 methods of slave punishment so brutal that even hardened Roman soldiers refuse to watch. We're talking about tortures that was so horrifying, some were actually banned by Roman law, and yet they still happened behind closed doors across the empire. By the end of this video, you'll understand why historians tried to bury these stories for centuries, and why what you're about to learn will forever change how you see the glorious that destroyed a person's identity in the most permanent way imaginable. Second, how Romans literally buried slaves alive and kept them conscious for. And finally, the crucifixion method that makes the version you learned about in school. See Merciful if you want to uncover history's darkest secrets that your textbooks never dare to print. Hit that subscribe button right now, because Roman gladiator training methods that were even worse than this. But here's what nobody tells you about ancient Rome behind all that marble. And they were the literal backbone of Roman civilization, and their suffering built every temple, road, and monument But here's the thing, Hollywood actually toned it down. The real story is so much worse that most historians have spent centuries avoiding the details. Here's where it gets really twisted. Roman law actually had protections for slaves. Masters couldn't legally kill them without cause, couldn't torture them beyond certain limits, and had to provide basic food and shelter. Existed because Romans saw themselves as civilized, superior to the barbarian tribes they conquered. And this is crucial, those laws only applied to public spaces and official proceedings. What happened in private villas, underground chambers, and remote estates? Spoken back to your master or tried to run away. The law says you can't be killed, but it says nothing about what can be done to make you wish you were dead. What I'm about to show you comes from 3 main sources: Pliny the Elder's detailed accounts, archaeological evidence discovered in Pompeii's preserved villas, and the shocking testimony of Seneca, a Roman philosopher who witnessed these punishments firsthand. And Torchlight, where the smell of burning charcoal fills your nostrils. Your master holds a glowing iron brand shaped like his initials. But this isn't just any punishment. This is the complete destruction of your humanity. The branding iron isn't applied to your mom or shoulder like in the movies. No Romans branded faces specifically. They burned the master's initials directly into the slave's forehead or cheek, making it impossible to hide, impossible to forget, and impossible. Pliny the Elder documented dozens of these cases, and his accounts are absolutely chilling. He describes how masters would heat the iron until it glowed white hot, then press it into the flesh for exactly would never fade. But here's what makes this even more horrifying. The branding wasn't about pain. It was about identity, destruction. A branded slave could pretend to be free, could never escape their past, and could never start over somewhere else. Every person who saw them would instantly know they were property, and worse, property that had been problematic enough to deserve permanent marking. The psychological torture was deliberate. Imagine looking in any reflective surface and seeing your master's initials burned into your face for the rest of your life. Imagine your own children seeing those letters and knowing exactly. Archaeologists have found specialized branding tools in Roman villas, custom-made iron stamps with intricate family crests and initials. These weren't crude instruments. They were precision tools designed for maximum psychological, turning human flesh into a twisted form of property advertisement. Pliny writes about 1 o'clock, or a slave named Marcus was branded with his master's full name, Cuse Julius Maximus, across his entire forehead. The process took multiple sessions because the iron had to be reheated between each letter. Marcus was conscious for all of it. But here's the truly sick part: who had never committed those crimes just to justify future punishments or to destroy their credibility if they ever tried to testify in court. His branding was just the beginning, because what Romans did to problem slaves underground will haunt your dreams. What I'm about to describe was discovered in 1982 beneath the preserved Roman villa in Pompeii, and it's so disturbing that Italian government restricted access to the site. For over a decade, archaeologists found a series of stone chambers, each barely large enough for one person to crouch inside. But these weren't storage rooms or wine cellars. They were torture chambers designed for one, burying slaves alive while keeping them conscious for as long as possible. Here's how it worked. A problem slave, someone who had tried to escape, challenge their master, or committed theft, would be forced into one of these stone boxes, tall enough to sit up but not stand, wide enough to extend your arms but not lie down flat. But here's where Roman Roman engineering turned truly evil. The chambers had small air holes, comfortable breathing. The slave would be sealed inside with exactly 3 days' worth of water and no food. The Pompeii excavation revealed 12 of these chambers, and 8 still contained human remains. Scratch marks on the stone walls show the victims tried to claw their way out. Some had worn their fingernails down to the bone, scratching at solid rock. Roman historian Tacitus described witnessing one of these puns. The condemned slave begged for a quick death, but the master replied the death was too merciful. He would learn what it meant to challenge his betters while buried in darkness, counting each breath until the earth claimed him. Panic and desperate attempts to escape. Day 2, declaration and delirium set in. Day 3, accept of death. But death wouldn't come for hours more. Some victims last 4 days because the air holes provided just enough oxygen to prolong the agony. What makes this even more sick is that this punishment wasn't illegal. Roman law prohibited killing slaves without cause, but technically the slave was dying from natural causes, suffocation and dehydration. Masters could claim they were simply confining problematic property until it reformed. Yet some masters would visit the chambers during the punishment, speaking, behave properly. Those who begged convincingly might be released after 2 days, broken, traumatized, but alive as an example to others. Yet even this wasn't Rome's most twisted invention. That special tools that archaeologists still find in Roman ruins today forget everything you think you know about Roman crucifixion. What they taught you in school was the merciful version, the quick death important political prisoners received but for slaves. Romans invented methods that could keep a person alive and conscious on the cross for over a week. Seneca, the younger, witnessed these extended crucifixions firsthand, and he describes seeing slaves on crosses equipped with small platforms for their feet, not to ease their suffering, but to prevent them from dying too quickly from asphyxiation. Engineers perfected prolonged crucifixion. First, they nailed the victim's wrists, not palms, to the crossbeam using specially designed iron spikes with flanged heads that prevented tearing through flesh. But here, between the victim's legs, this wasn't mercy. It was calculated cruelty. The Sedalia allowed crucified slaves to partially support their weight, which meant suffocation in 68 hours. They could survive for days, but it gets worse. Masters would hire doctors to attend the crucifixions. These physicians, that's what administer stimulants to keep slaves awake, provide just enough water to prevent death from dehydration, and even treat wounds if they became infected, all to extend the suffering as long as possible. Seneca describes walking along Roman roads where Hun, not to show mercy, but to ensure their property was offering adequately. The psychological torture was just as calculated as the physical family members. Spouses, children, parents were forced to watch. Some masters would crucify entire slave families together. Most disturbing accounts describes a slave named Darius who tried to escape with his wife and infant son. All 3 were crucified using the extended method. Darius lost in 6 days, his wife 4, and their baby. The masters showed no mercy, even for children. Died on the 2nd day. Darius was forced to watch his family die while he remained conscious. Romans even created the traveling masters could assemble anywhere. Rebellion had to be punished immediately wherever it occurred, but all of these pale in comparison to what happened when slaves. The most shocking punishment of all. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm exposing the Roman gladiator training methods that was somehow even worse than what we're discussing today. And trust me, you won't believe what they did to volunteers who joined the games for money. In 71 BC, the Roman general Marcus Crassus did something so horrifying that it haunts historians to this day. After crashing Spartacus's slave rebellion, he lined the European way, Rome's most important mood, with exactly 6,000 crucified slaves. But this wasn't ordinary crucifixion. This was a 120 display of extended torture designed to break the spirit of every slave in the empire. Picture this, traveling from Rome to Brandish, and for 3 entire days of walking, you never escape the sight and sound of dying slaves. Every few meters, another cross. Every cross, another human being slowly dying in agony. The smell was so over. Use the extended crucifixion method I just described on all 6,000 slaves with platforms, water rations. The first slaves died after 4 days. The last ones lived for over a week. Plutarch, the Roman historian, wrote that you could hear the screaming from 5 miles away. Local residents fled their homes because the psychological torture of listening to 6,000 people dying slowly was unbearable, even for hardened Romans who were used to gladiatorial games. But here's the twisted irony, that ultimately, Rome's extreme brutality backfired spectacularly. Instead of preventing future slave revolts, it convinced every slave in the empire the death in rebellion was preferable to capture slave uprisings actually increased off the Spartacus, becoming more desperate and more violent. The moral decay that allowed such systematic dehumanization infected Roman society from the ground up. Citizens became desensitized to suffer. Who could be more cruel? And the empire slowly lost the civic virtues that had made it great in the first place. Seneca himself recognized this connection. He wrote, "We who torched our slaves have tortured our own souls, we who deny humanity. Rome builds monuments to its glory on foundations of screaming stone." The ultimate irony, those 6,000 crucified slaves became martyrs whose suffering and collapse. Every extreme punishment created more desperate enemies. Every act of brutality proved to conquered peoples that Romans were the true barbarians within 400 years. Is this empire that built its power on systematic torture had crumbled? The descendants of those crucified slaves through various parts of history helped tear down the system that had created such unthinkable suffering. The slaves of Rome never forgot what was done to them, and neither should we. These weren't isolated incidents or the actions of a few sadistic masters. This was systematic dehumanization on an industrial scale, woven into the very fabric. Roman civilization. We're talking about a society that perfected torture the way we perfect technology, methodically, scientifically, and with pride in their innovation. But here's what disturbs me most. The capacity for this level of cruelty still exists. In human nature today, the same psychological mechanisms that allowed Roman citizens to ignore the screaming from underground chambers are still operating in modern societies that look the other way from systemic oppression. Genocide, or any form of systemic oppression, we plant the seeds of our own moral destruction. So here's my question for you. Which of these punishments shocked you most? And more importantly, what does it say about human nature that we are capable of such calculated cruelty? Let me know in the comments if you can even bring yourself to think about it. And if you want to see how Roman gladiator training methods was somehow even worse than everything we just discussed, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Trust me, next week's video will make this one look tame.